Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to start typing out our Redux Saga. Now, typing sagas is going to allow us to start really understanding the nuances of why typing them is so challenging. There are ways to make it easier, and it starts with including a new library as well as a new plugin. So in order for us to include the new library, what we'll say is yarn add typed Redux Saga. So type Redux Saga is a library that extends upon it this extension of typing out generators. And typing out generators is typically very challenging. Other than the type Redux Saga, we also need to include a macro for Babel. Now, I mentioned before that we will talk about Babel at the very end, but for now, all we need to really do is just include this additional dev dependency. So yarn add -dev babel -plugin -macros. Now that we have everything installed, going back into our code base, what we want to do is we want to start migrating over our sagas. So to begin, I'm going to switch this category saga over to a .ts file. The reason why we have typed Redux Saga is that we no longer need to use Redux Saga effects. Essentially, typed Redux Saga allows us to leverage a typed version of each of these effect creators. The way to use them, though, is that instead of calling yield, we will now be calling yield star. So the difference between yield and yield star is that yield typically yields the generator, and you're still inside of JavaScript generator land that handles the actual execution of those generator functions. Yield star is similar, but it essentially hands it off to the Redux Saga library. So Redux Saga is going to behave the same way, except because it's Redux Saga can coordinate and identify what these effects are, what their return values are going to be. Because if you remember with a saga can have multiple yield steps. Typically with a generator, it's very difficult to determine what the output of these generators are because each yield is an output of the next call in the generator. If you remember from our generator video. If you're unfamiliar, go back, rewatch that generator video because a lot of the difference between sagas and generators is extremely minimal. The main thing is just that you can see sagas as generators that have Redux bindings within them. But the other thing is that Redux Saga, the library, becomes the thing that actually drives and calls the generator in order to move it forward. But along the way, what it does is it's able to now determine the types of the values that come back. And by doing it like this, now we can see that we are getting the appropriate type errors. Now here, when we look at this type error, what is it that we see that's wrong? We notice that this is a very extensive mention inside of the overload matches, all of that stuff. Right now, that's not as important. The key thing that we see is that up here it says type Saga generator is not an array type or a string type. The compiler needs to use this option down level iteration to allow the iterating of iterators. So what we need to do is, in order for us to properly parse this file, we need to go into our tsconfig.json and inside of our compiler options. Now what we want to add is down level iteration, except we want to set it to true. On save here though, this may not work the way that we expect it to. If we go back to our category saga, sometimes if you hover over, you'll notice that the type errors have not gone away and you'll still see it. In our case, it did end up working for me, but if it does not for you, all you need to do is go into your VS Code and just close it. Make sure you close all of your VS Code, restart it, and what happens is that the VS Code compiler will rerun and hopefully pick up the correct changes from your tsconfig.json. It really happens when your computer is a little older and a little slower. Sometimes VS Code takes a lot of resources, so as a result, the TypeScript compiler and the linting might be a little bit behind. But now we see that everything is working here. Right away, we actually see that we have this error. Now, this error is due to the fact that this function does not receive any actual properties, but here I'm clearly passing it categories. So this is actually a mistake on my part. In JavaScript, it wouldn't throw an error because if you pass a parameter to the function still gets invoked, all of our code still works. But in my particular case, I'm passing a property in TypeScript that does not actually expect in this function. This function takes no properties. So that's actually one great thing that we can quickly fix to make our code less confusing. The next error, and this is again that catch error I was mentioning. In this catch can catch any type of error. So for us, it does not know what this is. It's always going to throw unknown, even though we're expecting a parameter of error. So here we might as well just cast this to error because we know that if this fails, we will be getting an error. And that's really all we needed to do in order for our sagas to be typed now. So if you look at the saga now, you'll look inside of this generator definition. You'll see that what it does is it makes a call effect as the categories array. So each of these different values in the first part of the generator tells you what the yield values will be. One is going to be a call effect that returns back the category array. Now the category array is the return of this get categories and documents call. So yield, as you can clearly tell, of that one will give you a call effect, which I mentioned is an effect generated by Redux Saga, and that returns you back the category array. The next is the yield of the put effect. It does fetch categories success. Finally, we have also a put effect of fetch categories failed. These are the three different possible yields that can come out of fetch categories async. So that is essentially what the first parameter of the generator represents. The next one is the return value. So this is if inside of our generator function, we return something as a final value, which we rarely ever do inside of our generators. So for us, that's going to be void. And then the third argument of the generator are any values that we pass into the next call in order for them to get passed into the subsequent yield calls. So for us, we generally also don't really handle those. So most of the time, we're really just focused on this initial typing right here for the generator. But as we notice with the yield star call inside of typed Redux Saga, what will happen is that this inference gets deferred to the actual Redux Saga library. And typed Redux Saga is smart enough to actually go through it and infer all the required types for any sagas and generators that get called in order to build out this actual type structure. So we really don't have to do it ourselves. So now that we've typed category saga, we have to type user sagas. And user sagas are going to be more complicated because there's a lot more saga code in there, and there's actually a couple adjustments we need to make in order to make it fit inside of TypeScript. So join me in the next video. Let's start typing out user sagas.